guys can hear it. So this video is called The Rise of Friendslop and its effect on the industry. I saw this video thumbnail in a Reddit that I'm in a couple days ago. I haven't watched this video, but I'm guessing he's kind of like shitting on these like smaller indie games that are made for like multiplayer. It was posted 2 weeks ago. It's by a guy named Not Freaking Nick. Let's get into the video.
Everybody has that one friend. You know the one, the guy that goes,
"Something just came across my desk, John. It is perhaps the best thing I've seen in the last 6 months."
and then the next thing you know, you're dropping $10 on a game that you were going to play once or twice before it gathers digital cobwebs in your Steam library. If you don't have one of those friends, then chances are that you are that friend. Recently, there's been a huge surge in cheaply made, fun multiplayer games that are designed from the ground up for you to play with your friends, and the popular term for these games is Friendslop, which also sounds like the first ever slur for a video game. It comes from this tweet that was back in March of 2025, where this person says,
"I don't know how else to describe it, but I call this genre of game Friendslop. Its sole purpose of existence is friend farming."
and while the person who said this was joking, the sentiment was pretty widespread at the time. This tweet coincided with a bit of a cultural heel turn on these games. It was shortly after Repo came out, and as is tradition with anything that exists on the internet, a thing gets introduced, people like it, people copy it, it gets a little saturated, and then everybody acts like it's the downfall of our collective civilization. While I personally am against calling things slop unless it's a Marvel movie, AI generated, or something on the Burger King menu, I kind of agree with this tweet. Despite the overall cringy nature of the post, these games kind of approximate slop, we'll get to that later, and their success lives and dies based on how many friends you can convince to buy the game so you can play it with them. To get us all on the same page here.
Well, I mean, like, collectively we have to think about, too, is that, like, I'm just putting my thoughts in here now because I don't want to react to the whole video and then just not talk. And he could say something that could change my mind. But the problem that I think people have with games like these are the same type of people that will buy Call of Duty every year, right? I look at a video game like Repo or Peak or, oh my God, Lethal Company. They're all very cheap games. And yes, I guess you could call them slop because they're cheap, but that's what makes them so fun. And it's like the proof that you can make a game that cheap and it blow up that massively is, like, in my opinion, showing that you don't have to spend $60 on a fucking yearly COD or a battle pass in Fortnite to have a good game to play with your friends. Now, in saying that, if their argument is saying that they're literally only games that you can play with your friends, that would be accurate because there are single player modes to Lethal Company and Peak and stuff like that, but the overall experience is playing with your friends. And I feel like, again, he could change my mind with what he's about to say, but I feel like anybody that's calling games like these Friendslop are probably people that don't play games with their friends. And that's not me saying that in a negative light. Like, if you think that Lethal Company or Peak is a Friendslop game and you're used to playing Red Dead story mode, like you're playing a lot of story mode games, yeah, you're not going to be entitled or enticed to want this game because it's not a game that you play. Kind of a rough take off rip, but we'll keep watching.
Let's define the term Friendslop, because that original tweet got some heated responses from people saying that it's just a lowbrow way of saying co-op multiplayer game. However, to me, that would be like trying to get mad at the first person to call PUBG a battle royale and saying that the genre already has a name and that it's a team-based shooter. So the way that I'm choosing to define Friendslop is that they are games that are cheap, involve a simple gameplay loop, and are made by an indie studio with the specific intention of having friends enhance the experience by playing it together. In today's video, I want to explore the history of the genre, go into why it's been successful, and whether or not it is good for the industry as a whole. While Lethal Company is the first horseman of the recent Friendslop apocalypse, there are some games that I see as precursors to the genre. Mount Your Friends is an almost QWOP-like game where you play as these beefcake...
Mount Your Friends? That's a classic callback, bro. Holy shit. Dude, there's like a 3D version of it now. I remember playing this on 360, dude. I deadass remember playing this on 360.
Dolls wearing banana hammocks, trying to create and climb up a tower of sweaty buff men. Whoever fails to climb the ever-enlarging tower within the time limit loses. This game took off about a decade ago, primarily because of content creators like PewDiePie. Between the overly long nipples of the characters, the name Mount Your Friends, and the dick and balls on full display, this game
Facts.
fully captures the
This is
humor
probably
of
TOS,
2014,
but I'm a small
that
channel,
being
so.
homoeroticism as a punchline. Ultimately, it was a cheap $5 game that released on Steam, and it appealed to the immature and competitive mindset of friend groups with a bit of time to kill. I think Quiplash is the next major forefather to the Friendslop genre. You're given prompts that you anonymously answer, and your answer is pitted against that of another person, while everybody else votes on whichever one was the funniest. What makes this fundamental to the ethos of Friendslop, in my opinion, is that Quiplash is only as fun as your friends are. If your friends are boring, games like Lethal Company and Peak will be boring, and if their humor sucks, your round of Quiplash will suck. Next game is Jennifer
But I
Joust.
feel like, would I be wrong in saying that that applies to any video game you play? If you're playing with friends, right? If you're playing with friends, let's rule out the fact that anytime I talk about this, I'm gonna assume that I'm talking about playing games with friends. But wouldn't that be the case for any game? That's why I don't know if I can show this, bro. Any game you play with friends is going to be less or more fun depending on who you're playing with. And that's just low key a fact. Like you wouldn't play Quiplash with Dwight, right? You wouldn't play that because it wouldn't be funny. But like if you have friends and you know what type of humor that your friends have, like you're gonna be like, hey, let's play this game. So I don't understand, like they kind of like dig themselves in a hole, and I don't even know why this is even like an argument or like an online thing right now. But people are like tweaking about, you know, these games. It's no different than if you hop into a lobby with Call of Duty with some of your boys, right? I don't understand that argument. It's only as fun as your friends are. Yeah, that's the point.
Among Us. While it came out in 2018, it had its heyday in 2020 because of, you know, the Rona.
Yep.
While we were all stuck in lockdown, we turned to YouTube and Twitch. Streamers started playing the funny space game, and we all thought to ourselves, oh, for $5, I too can play Mafia with my friends and family while we all stay socially distanced. And just like that, we made multimillionaires out of a small team of indie game developers.
Yep.
The game is at its best when you're with a group of people you know, in a Discord call, or maybe even with a proximity chat mod. Among Us was truly a moment in time and is absolutely the major precursor to the recent surge in cheap indie co-op games. There are probably a few other games that you could very rightly say fit in this category of
just to
trailblazers
add
for
real quick
friends.
too, the reason that Among Us was so popular is because I believe I think it was on PC, but it released very quickly to mobile, and the fact that almost everyone has a smartphone that's capable of playing games, like, you know, any type of a game. The fact that anybody could play the game with somebody else was what made it so popular. And that goes to add to most indie games too. The problem that people have with these, I guess if you want to call it a problem, is that they feel like they're being robbed because they're paying $10 for a cheap game. But the reason that they blow up so much is because they're usually super simple to play, but you can constantly get different outcomes from playing it. So like if I were to buy I love using Kenzie as an example. If I were to pay $60 for, we'll just go with Call of Duty, even though I don't play it much. If I pay $60 for Call of Duty and then have Kenzie try to play that, right, with where the state of the game is at right now, and then I buy her a $10 game that has like 60% less controls and, you know, learning capabilities that you have to play Call of Duty, there's like a 99% chance that Kenzie's going to play the $10 game more than Call of Duty, because you don't have to turn your brain on to 200% to like do anything in the game. You can just log on, get a couple of your homies and play it. So if the argument is that they feel like they're being robbed because it's $10 and it's not that much of a game, there's less to do. Among Us is a perfect example of that, because one, I think Among Us was free at some point, but there was like ads or something. And then if you wanted like the full version, it was like $3 or something. That's the perfect example of that, because it blew up and it was minimal. Like the same process was, if you were the imposter, you had to kill everybody. And if you were not the imposter, you had to survive. And it just blew up because it was so easy to play, and you could constantly have a different outcome with different friends, or even the same friends.
You got like Human Fall Flat, Heave Ho, Ultimate Chicken Horse. Maybe you could say Phasmophobia and Dead by Daylight, but I was thinking mostly games that are $10 or less and that have a more simple gameplay loop. But now let's move on to what this video is truly about. Lethal Company, and those games that came after.
Modern Friendslop. Let's see what they
Lethal
have to
Company
say.
came out in October of 2023 and is the game that is responsible for the modern era of Friendslop. This game came out of nowhere, it went viral, and it changed the indie game scene for the foreseeable future. It was developed by a single guy named Zeekers, and it casts you and your friends as the employees of the company. You go on dangerous excursions to find loot and satisfy ever-increasing quotas set by the company. It's got everything you could ever want from a multiplayer video game. You've got wild monsters, proximity chat, and OSHA violations out the wazoo. It also helps that this whole game is basically slapstick comedy simulator, and it begs to be clipped and posted to TikTok.
Look, I'm leaving, bro. If I don't make it.
But I do want to touch more on the proximity chat because I feel that was key to Lethal Company's
God,
success.
dude, I have so many
It made
memories with
professional
fucking
voice
Lethal
actors
Company.
out of friend groups.
I
When
had
you're
a
hearing
huge,
the distance-
I used to have a huge group that we would play almost like every single day. We would play every single night. If we were working the morning shift and then we all got off and we were off in the night, we would play for so long in the night. And there were so many fucking clips that I had of this game. And it sucks because I don't have them anymore because I sold my old PC and all that stuff was on the drive.
Screams
So.
of a friend in peril. Or the muffled gurgles of some poor soul as they drown. The sound design revolving around the proximity chat is nothing short of incredible. As the game took the hell off on social media platforms, content creators jumped on it, hoping that they could get a slice of that viral pie. As a game that was made by a sole developer, it probably would have been a quick burn before all of the content was sucked out of it, were it not for the modders who also flocked to this game. Lobby player caps were increased from 4 to whatever the hell you can handle until your game crashes. New monsters, levels, items, emotes, and customization options were added. Small quality of life mods addressed player pain points, and hell, even a VR mod was added to the game. If the game's initial virality made Lethal Company a success, then the modding community is what made the game an industry shaker. And just like how PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds started the Battle Royale genre that hundreds of developers soon followed, Lethal Company lit a spark in the inexpensive, silly co-op game genre that was soon followed by many others. Content Warning was the first game to jump on the Friendslop hype train, coming out less than 6 months after Lethal Company. It came out so soon after, and it was so similar in nature that I was wondering if Zeekers and Landfall Games ended up having the same idea around the same time. But no. While Lethal Company was in development for about 2 years before going...
Well, I mean, too, to add to what he was saying before this clip, with the, I feel like he's low-key comparing these games or talking about Friendslop in a term of if you're a content creator. Because I know people that played Lethal Company and, Content Warning. I know people that have played Content Warning, and I know people that play Lethal Company, and I know people that play Peak, being the most recent one, that don't stream, don't make content. They play the game with their friends because it's fun, right? So if he's arguing the fact that, like, yes, they keep pumping these Friendslop games out and tweaking stuff just a little bit so that people can hop back on it and then make a bunch of new content, my argument to that is just don't follow the people or don't watch people's content on that game. If it's ruining the experience of the game for you, then don't worry about it. But if your argument is that it's annoying that people are taking these same games with a slight difference, so you could compare Content Warning with Repo and, or not Repo, Content Warning with Lethal Company, you could, you know, argue that, but at the same time, either don't watch the content or don't buy the game. Like, it's gonna happen with anything. Like, there's no way to stop that. That's, if your argument is because people keep making content of similar games, you can't stop that. That's literally what the internet is. That's like telling a streamer, that's like telling a gaming streamer to stream but not play games. It's the same fucking thing. So if that's his argument, it's I don't know. I feel like this video is kind of stupid.
Content Warning was a result of a game jam, which is an exercise where a group of developers
Yeah, I remember
lock in
reading about
for a
that.
few weeks and crank out a game. So in a sense, Content Warning is truly the first actual Friendslop game. Much like Lethal Company, Content Warning involves a group of people venturing out from their safe home base to a dangerous area in hopes of finding loot. However, the loot in question here is just content. You have a video camera capable of recording up to 90 seconds of footage, and you try to go viral on SpookTube by filming monsters. If you don't get enough views, then you hang up the camera, give up on your passion of becoming a content creator, and you die of sadness. Content Warning had a very specific janky charm to it, and I really appreciated what Landfall set out to do and the meta narrative behind all of this. They knew that the game was going to live or die based on people who wanted to make content out of it. The game did fairly well for itself, peaking at nearly 70,000 players, which certainly isn't nothing for a game developed in less than a month. However, it did not get nearly to the heights of Lethal Company. You could blame it on releasing too soon after Lethal Company, or being too similar, or maybe having a less than stellar post-launch support. But at the end of the day, its moderate success proved that there was an appetite for cheap games that were dumb fun. The next several months saw a handful of games that could be considered Friendslop.
Well, because like another thing that I really need to drill this point home, because he keeps saying that it's cheap games. I don't think people measure, and I think a lot of, I don't like that phrase, because when people say that, it almost makes it sound like people are they base a game's value on the price that they paid for it. And to a certain degree, yes, that should be the way it is, but I don't feel like that's how people look at video games. Because when you're talking about video games, you're not saying, oh my God, we'll use Legend of Zelda, for example. The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom was so good because I paid $69 for it, right? No, you're saying that because you know what Zelda, well, usually. I'd say 80% of the people that bought Zelda Tears of the Kingdom know what the Legend of Zelda series is, and they know what has to offer, right? It's not the price point. And I think using the cheap $10 price tag as like a main argument point is people aren't buying it because it's cheap. They're buying it because they see other people having fun with the game, and they also want to have fun with their own version of it, if that makes sense. And what I mean by their own version of it is like they want to play that game with their friends to see what their outcomes are. And you could sit there and say, yes, price point is a defining factor, but I'm gonna sit here and say that if that shit was priced at like $30 or $40, but it still blew up on social media the same way, I still feel like people would buy the game. Like you might hear people complain about, oh my God, this game's not worth $40, but I'm fully confident that people would still probably buy the game. It's not the price of the game, it's the memories that you make with the game, if that makes sense. Gaming, to a lot of people, I'm speaking broadly here, but 90% of the people that play video games play them for the joy that it brings you. They don't play it because of the price point, or because they need to play it or something. It's because it's fun. People enjoy it. That's the whole joy of these cheap games, is like, yes, eventually it will sit in your library and collect cobwebs, but that's much like any game. Call of Duty, I keep bringing that up because it's a perfect example. It's been on both spectrums. It's been super popular, and it's been way less popular lately. You'll buy a new COD every year. You'll play it for roughly a year, if even, right? And then that COD will sit in your library when you buy the COD next year. It's the same rinse and repeat. So I don't know. I don't like the argument of like the whole $10 thing. But
Murky Divers, which asked, "What if
I never played Murky Divers
underwater?" And while it was a fun game, it definitely underperformed compared to the others in its cohort. It wasn't until early 2025 when we started to see some more heavy hitters in the genre. Repo released in February of 2025 from Swedish game studio Semiwork, and it did a great job of harkening back to Lethal Company while also expanding on the gameplay loop that Zeekers had already laid out. You're still going into dangerous areas full of monsters, and you're pillaging them of their resources, and there's still proximity chat shenanigans, but there's a bit more of a forced cooperation in Repo. Unlike Lethal, the items you loot can be hazards in and of themselves. Some are heavy, some are awkwardly shaped, and some are cursed. And items lose value if they're dropped or bonked, and can completely shatter if you're not careful. Therefore, it's a lot more viable, or you could argue necessary, to travel with the buddy system, so you can have two people carry heavy or awkward objects, or use one person to distract the monsters while the other carries a fragile object. Unlike Content Warning or Murky Divers, this game is performed on par with Lethal Company in spite of the nasty cover image. I think the major contributing factor to this is enough time had passed, so there is a bit of a hunger for another silly horror roguelike cooperative game with proximity chat. Either that or they had really good marketing. I don't know, I'm not an industry analyst. Around this time is when the term Friendslop was coined. Once again, while this term was coined as a joke, there was a genuine bit of frustration or concern that this was the direction that the industry was headed. Every few weeks, a new cheap indie horror extraction roguelike game with proximity chat was being announced, and even bigger studios coming out with multiplayer games were accused of just making expensive Friendslop. But I personally think we didn't need to shift away from cheap co-op experiences. I think at this time, what we needed most was a different cheap co-op experience.
No, dude.
And that's when Peak came into play.
Okay.
Peak came out in the summer of 2025 and was developed by the tag team duo of Aggro Crab and Landfall. The teams came up with the idea while hanging out in a hot tub, game jammed it out for a couple of weeks before deciding to expand on it for a few more months. This is such a weird situation because you almost never see two indie game developers that are completely independent of each other work in tandem to make a game together. However, this works so well. Aggro Crab, the makers of games like Another Crab's Treasure, specialize in cute vibes and they were able to bring that to the table. Meanwhile, Landfall, having made games like Content Warning, Totally Accurate Battle Simulator, and a whole bunch of other really cheap multiplayer games, they brought that experience as well, and together they were able to mishmash them and create Peak. You play as a group of scouts whose flight crosses on an island with a giant mountain, and you need to reach the peak of that mountain in order to be rescued. And it has all the trappings that you would expect from the genre. Proximity chat, slapstick humor, cannibalism, an incredibly simple gameplay loop, and a potential fun factor that depends on who you play with. It's also super clippable, so there's that too. Another unique thing about Peak that other Friendslop games don't really do is there is a specific tangible goal that you are trying to reach. It feels like a lot of Friendslop games are like, yeah, let's just keep surviving until you don't. It's also a nice breath of fresh air in the sense that most of these other games have been close quarters.
Well, I just seeing and hearing him talk about this and just the overall thing, I kind of beg to ask the question, do you think that Friendslop games like these are so popular today because of what we went through in COVID? Does that, to elaborate on that, do you think that games you play with your friends in a co-op aspect do better now because we were so isolated in COVID times? I know it was 5 years ago, but everybody's going to be able to agree with me that 2020 does not feel like it was 5 years ago. It's fucking insane. It feels like it was maybe a couple years ago. But do you think that maybe co-op games are doing better now because we were so isolated back then? Because my example to that is pre-COVID, there was a very, very large calling for people that watched like Call of Duty games and more single player games, right? They wanted to play single player games. And I think the aspect to that was because there was so much more socialization going on. I think I said that word right. There was so much more people hanging out and there was so much more events and, going to concerts and stuff like that, to where people got their fill on socially, social gatherings and stuff before COVID. And then COVID hit. And since we were all locked down for like almost a year or two, basically being at home all the time. And if you did have a job, it was either remote or you were very isolated. You weren't allowed to be around people or stuff like that. I think it kind of shifted our mindsets in like, hey, well, if we can't have hangouts here because of COVID or whatever, what's the next best thing we can do? Hop on a video call or hop on games, right? And I think that's why games like these do so popular, is because that's kind of in a way, I know this is going to be really fucking weird to say, but kind of in a way, people are still living in that mindset because we don't have COVID anymore, but it's not like a lot of people just don't hang out anymore. And the big cause of that right now is because nobody makes any fucking money. Everybody works to literally pay their rent, and then that's it. You can't go out and get fucking food. You can't, unless you're a millionaire, but you can't go out and go see a movie like it's nothing. You have to fucking save up for it. So I think that's why these games are so popular. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my take on it. I think these games are so well made because it gives you the illusion or the feeling of hanging out with friends and having a good time, but not having to leave your house or spend a fuck ton of money to go do something, whether that be going to the movies or going ice skating or doing this. Everything costs more than $10 to do if you add in gas and stuff like that. So games that can give you the joy that you have hanging out with your friends, that's why they do so good.
Horror-focused experiences. While this is a bright and colorful game that is very decidedly a non-horror experience. Blowing the lid off of expectations like that after a year and a half of these games being mainly extraction looters shows that there can be variety in cheap co-op gaming experiences. With all of that being said, is Friendslop a good thing? I personally would go out on a limb and say yes, Friendslop is generally a good thing for the video game industry as long as developers innovate. I don't know if you've noticed, but the industry is kind of on fire right now. Development costs are ballooning and people are getting laid off left and right. So if a 20-year-old furry wants to use his spare time to become a millionaire off of a cheap, silly game that I play with my friends a few times, hell yeah, dude, all the power to you. I mean it with every fiber in my being when I say that independent game developers are carrying the industry on their backs right now. We're in a position where we need good games that are made cheaper and quicker as opposed to billion-dollar games made over 10 years and have half the team laid off as soon as it releases.
Yeah.
But once again, I think this is a good thing as long as the developers innovate. We've already seen a few games try to reheat Lethal Company's nachos and underperform. I think the extraction looter roguelike brand of games has kind of run its course with Repo. I could absolutely be wrong. We'll have to wait and see. But if Peak showed us anything, it's that there's an appetite for co-op games with objectives that aren't just loot stuff until you fail to loot enough stuff.
Yeah.
Welcome. A criticism that I've heard about Friendslop is that they're rarely sustainable games in the long run and tend to have a short lifespan, which I find it kind of hard to care too much about, to be honest. I've spent $60 on games that I've beaten in 10 hours and never touched again.
Exactly.
Why should I care if I spend $10 on a co-op game I play with my friends for a few fun nights and move on?
And that's like my next, I mean, it's almost the end of the video. I'll make it quick. That argument I immediately hate when people are like, oh, you're spending $10 on a game that you're going to play maybe like 10 hours or 20 hours of, right? For games so specifically like this, comparing it to, I'm going to keep using this as a comparison just because it's one of the biggest franchises, even though it's dog shit right now. But Call of Duty, you do the same thing every year for the yearly Call of Duty. People have been buying $60 Call of Duties for the last 5.5 years, right? The same thing. Everyone buys the Call of Duty, and you say it's not because you're buying a new Call of Duty and it's the same series, but it's literally no different than that. You're most likely playing zombies or multiplayer on Call of Duty. If people buy a $10 multiplayer game and you play it for 10 hours and then not sit on it, you still have a higher chance to go back to that game and playing it, especially if the devs like update it every now and then, which Peak players, I mean, the Peak devs have been doing. But especially if you have a genuine indie creator that cares about the game after it's blown up and stuff, and they keep pushing updates out, you're going to be more inclined to go back and play that game than you would to be a year-old Call of Duty. A game's value shouldn't be based on the price you pay for it. It should be based on the amount of fun you have playing it. And if this game is based around playing it with your friends, most likely, unless you're a very hateful person, 99.9% of the time, you're going to have a really good time playing it because you're playing it with people that you care about.
Friend groups a chance to kind of hang out and catch up, and it's cheaper than going out to dinner, doing a round of golf, or going out
I literally just said that earlier. It's cheaper than going out for golf or something like that.
drinks.
Obviously, I'm not saying that games like this should replace outings like that. I definitely am not saying that. I want to make that very clear. I am a very big advocate for going out and doing stuff. I like getting outside. I like going doing stuff, visiting new places, going on vacation. Do all of that. Still do that with your homies. But while you're grinding your ass off like a American slave that we all are, working for pennies, right? While you save up for that vacation or that trip or whatever you guys have planned, games like these exist and you can get through the tough times with these experiences.
Just to be
That's
clear,
my take
I'm
on
not
it.
saying that playing video games needs to replace going out and touching grass.
I swear to God, I did not pre-watch this. I swear to God, dude, I did not fucking pre-watch this.
I'm not saying that playing video games needs to replace going out and touching grass and hanging out with people in person. I think that's very important. I'm just saying that Friendslop is a good supplement to hanging out. But anyway, there's this odd obsession with multiplayer games needing to receive new free content every month or so, or else the developers are failures, and I struggle to agree with that.
Yeah.
Not every online game is meant to be updated in perpetuity, and that is totally fine. In fact, I honestly kind of feel like that's one of the core pillars of Friendslop. These games feel like they're meant to be moments in time as they go viral, have millions of people play them, spawn a treasure trove of funny videos, and then fade out. And then sometime later, we look back on them fondly, remembering the good times and the people we shared those good times
Exactly.
with. But anyway, my name is freaking Nick. I hope this video was a good watch. If
that was a W video. I thought that like I was literally gonna be like pissed as fuck at this guy, but that was a good video. I think adding on to that, I definitely like a lot of people don't say video games are like this, but I definitely think that video games are experiences. They're not. I think the problem arises when people treat video games like a object or something. They're failures, like the devs are failures if they don't keep pushing content out for their game. And I think that goes even broader than that. If a developer decides that he doesn't want to update his game anymore, the game still exists and you can still play it in its most recent form, which would be the last update or version of that game, right? But that goes into a way deeper conversation of saying that's why so many different video games exist in the first place, is because if you get bored of, say, playing Peak, there's millions of other games that you can go play, right? And if you want games in the same genre like Peak, I promise you there's probably other games like Peak that you could play. Another perfect example of that is Call of Duty. Every year they release a new Call of Duty. So if you get bored with the current Call of Duty or they stop dropping updates for it, which they usually do, you can buy the next Call of Duty and play that. It's the same thing for any game. I don't understand. I don't know where he was hearing this or the complaints about people bitching about why games don't get updates after it. It's like it's not a big deal. You can just buy another game and play a different game. It's not anybody else's fault. Don't blame it on the dev. Like if you were the dev and you got if you made $1 million from a game that you made in like a week and people were mad at you because you didn't keep updating it after you've made over $1 million on it, fuck them, dude. That's on them. Tell them to make their own fucking game. I don't know. I think that's kind of fucking weird. I would never. I don't know why. There's people that like expect people to keep making updates for games that they made years ago. Okay, there's one more video that I